All right, what is going on, everybody? Welcome back to a very special edition of SaberSim's DFS Office Hours. I'm joined here today with Andrew and Matt, and we are going to be talking about our new big rules update that we just pushed earlier this afternoon. So it gives you quite a bit of a new degree of control over your lineups. There is a lot of power here, a lot of customization options. I think with that, there's going to be plenty of questions from people here today. So we wanted to do a quick stream, have these guys on here, talk a little bit about how it all works, answer some questions. And I think we're all just really excited about this over here at SaberSim. So just wanted to do a quick stream. But Matt, Andrew, first of all, what's going on? How are you guys? Have you gotten a chance to mess with I know probably in some testing, but have you got a chance to like play with the new rules and like really actually build some lineups yet?
Matt, you can go first.
Well, yeah, I mean, I've done a lot of testing around, trying to break it and whatnot. So I haven't actually entered lineups using it yet, but I played around with a lot, testing a lot of different combinations. I think I'm really excited about the possibilities because there's so many different ways I think to use these rules that we haven't even thought of. So,
what about you, Andrew?
I've messed around with it. I'm looking forward to using it a little bit tomorrow in the showdown, and really looking forward to using it for the football main slate this weekend.
Yeah, me too. I mean, I'm even looking forward to baseball tonight. I think, in the video I put out earlier today, I talked about a couple baseball rules. I'm pretty excited to see it just for that. Real quickly, before we jump in, just wanted to mention a couple things for everybody. So I did put out a video here earlier today. It will have shown up at the bottom of your SaberSim screen. If you haven't logged into SaberSim yet either, you'll see it there. But it's right here on the YouTube channel. Just a really helpful walkthrough, just a little over 10 minutes that I think will kind of give you an idea of how these rules work, what you might do for different sports. Obviously, not going to cover everything in that video, but I think a really good way to just get started. And for anybody watching along here live, fire away at us, ask any questions you have about how to use these new rules, and we'll answer some questions. But I mean, first things first, I'm interested to hear kind of for both you guys, how do you see these fitting into your processes? Is there a particular sport or a particular contest or anything like that you think these might be particularly valuable, or anything that you've been looking forward to doing? That video I put out earlier today is kind of all the things that have always been in the back of my mind of some ways that I might want to do some rules for different sports. But I'm curious just for you guys, like how this fits into your DFS process.
I'll say one thing that I'm really curious to see is how people in the community use it in ways that we never thought about, in ways that Matt didn't think about when creating it, in ways that we're not even gonna touch on this stream. I think we're gonna get so much great feedback from everybody using it. And I think the tool is just really strong overall. Ways I plan on using it are for showdowns with trying to avoid super chalk constructions and hopefully get more unique lineups is something I'm really looking forward to trying to do there.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point about trying to avoid chalk lineups. Not, that's the only reason, but I think for me, the biggest value is going to be places where I don't feel like, SaberSim gets me all the way there in terms of if I just, with Showdown, SaberSim's creating really good lineups that follow game scripts and are viable.
Right.
But it's not necessarily doing too much to avoid dupes and that sort of thing. That's, I think, where you can add a lot of value. And honestly, until you said that, Andrew, I hadn't even really thought of using rules that way, but I think that's a really good idea. You could do something as simple as setting rules based on the ownership of the players, but I think you could get even more creative of some rules that people might actually force on showdown lineups. You could sort of do the inverse, because a lot of people will be like, if I have a wide receiver captain, then always include the quarterback in the flex, right? But that's such a common dupe heavy rule that you could actually do the opposite and be like, if I have wide receiver captain, don't include the quarterback in the flex. Not that you should. I do not recommend using that rule globally, but
not globally, but those are the things that I'm thinking about that you hit on the head.
And I think just in general, for me, the first thing is sports that we have either we don't have sim support for, or where we just know that the sim is, not as strong maybe. So I don't really play NASCAR much, but I could see if I was playing NASCAR, that's maybe the kind of sport that I could see adding some more rules. Just, our sims are really good, but they're not perfect. And, that's a sport where there's some more value I think you would get with rules. But then for NFL, I think for me, it would be adding just a few little things to kind of quality control my lineups. So it's not like, oh, I want every lineup to look like this. It's maybe I run a build. I see some combinations of players that I don't really like in my lineups, or just some constructions that I'm not really happy with. And I might just be setting some conditional rules about, if this player's in the lineup, then don't include this one, or uh, something like that. Two running backs from the same team, maybe sometimes is viable, but maybe for a big main slate, I just want to say don't include lineups like that because they're just not really worth it. So that's how I see myself using it, is more of like a quality control kind of after I run my research build and see what I'm getting.
And what I really like is the if then part of it, because before we would have to set like a blanket rule in a way where it'd be like, if I wanted to pair my running back with my defense, it would be for every lineup in your build because you didn't have that optionality. But now you're almost getting a pool where you have some like in a certain way and then others not. Like you could pick a specific running back, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah,
so
or
can,
even like based teams on certain stats as well.
Right.
Like one thing that I've been playing with recently in my process is just like thinking about, correlating the players who you're spending more salary on and who are projected for more. Like, if I'm playing a punt running back that's like min price that just has a decent average projection, I'm not as concerned about that game script where the defense dominates and the guy gets a ton of carries on the ground because he's probably going to be involved in the passing game. But, when you are paying up for maybe more of the the Dalvin Cook type, maybe that is an angle where the Vikings defense actually does kind of stifle the Lions, and correlating those two there makes more sense. And now you can do that conditionally based on how high that player is projected. One thing I do want to stress, and Matt, I think you touched on it. We already have a question on it as well here from Skull. He said, we don't have to use these new group rules, right? We can just use QB +1 and et cetera. SaberSim will already know to include that the wide receiver or the tight end in that case. And that's a point I really do want to stress, that this is definitely kind of an add-on, a way to get some additional control, some more power for your lineups if you want to fine tune. But by no means should you feel like this needs to become a part of your process, especially on day one, right? We've got a baseball slate here tonight, even the Thursday night football game coming up on Thursday, the Sunday main slate on Sunday. I don't want to give the impression at all that you all of a sudden have to start doing these things, adding these new groups and things like that. I think the healthiest way to go about incorporating this into your process slowly would be to do what Matt said: run a build with nothing, right? Run a build the way that maybe you used to, and start studying your lineups a little bit more and look and see, is there a particular construction that you want a little bit less of, or you don't want at all? Is there a combination of players that you think is more valuable that you're not getting enough of? The new rules will basically allow you to have that control when you have an opinion about something on the slate. But I don't want anyone to feel like they have to all of a sudden adapt to this immediately, like day one, as soon as we release this.
Yeah, absolutely. I am probably one of the most trusting of SaberSim people because I, built a lot of it, and I feel like I generally don't do very much to my settings or my default lineups. I think the biggest thing that I do is sort of risk management in the build, of making sure that my exposures are spreading out my risk enough that I'm not going all in on certain players or whatever. But so for me, I don't expect to use these rules very heavily because I'm not a strongly opinionated person. And when it comes to DFS and rules, I tend to trust SaberSim, but a lot of people are opinionated and want that control over their lineups. And that's not, it's not bad, good or bad either way. It's not bad if you don't use the rules at all, like you said, but it's also not bad if you want to use the rules heavily, as long as you have good reasons for using them. And if it's part of your existing process, if you've used another optimizer or you've just you've wanted to do certain things with SaberSim and haven't been able to, there's nothing wrong with like setting that control. But yeah, certainly don't feel like just because we added a new tool that you have to use it.
Yeah, no, for sure. One thing I wanted to just start jumping into some of these questions here that had come in through Discord. I see YouTube chat is busy here, so we'll get to everything. We'll knock these out in about the order that they're coming in. Real quickly, Average Tuesday said, can you go over how your own go-to stacking rules for NFL would be entered in the new stacking rule format? And mentioned the attached a screenshot to how I used to do my stacks on the old basic stacking rule. I'm going to have to play around with it a little bit, to be honest, but I think my baseline of what I'm going to do is probably going to be just as simple as this, which I was building in the background here, which is basically just saying at least 2 players with a QB and 1 running back, wide receiver, or tight end. A very flexible rule, a really wide open rule that just basically says, I want to do a stack. And then from there, let SaberSim kind of figure out what the best stacking combinations are based on our upside correlations. I'll probably do a little bit of fine tuning here from there in the stack exposures in the post build process. But I think that's probably how I'm going to port this over on my end.
Yeah. And if you do, I saw that screenshot. If you want to do exactly that, you would just uncheck in the stack types on the homepage, just uncheck the like QB plus 2, or what, like anything that has more than 1 player on the opposing team. So I think it would just be like QB plus 2, QB plus 2, 1, QB plus 1, 1, QB plus 1, basically. Yeah.
Yeah. And these, I think, can still be super useful. And actually, Chuck had asked a question here as well in Discord. I think this is a good opportunity to go into this. And he said, is there a conflict when using these new lineup rules with this team stack and stack types and game stacks exposures here? I mean, Matt, I know we've done some testing in that regard, but like, what are your thoughts on kind of using these 2 tools in conjunction with one another?
Oh, I think it's great. There's definitely not a conflict. The only thing I will say there is if you do weird stuff on the stack types, if you're like, oh, I only want QB plus 5 or something like that, then it's not a lot of the ways that the exposure, when you're unchecking stack types and modifying the exposures there, that kind of works a little bit differently in the builder, and that when you uncheck, it's not necessarily setting a rule that we can't have this. Sometimes it's just, we'll just keep trying to make lineups, and if we are making a lineup that's not allowed, then we'll just discard it and keep trying. And so we have some logic around there to make it faster and more efficient, but when you're doing really far out there stuff, you probably want to add a rule if it's the type of construction that SaberSim won't make naturally. So I think that they can definitely work well together if you want to say, okay, this is the baseline I want for my rule, but I don't want it to go beyond, if I want to say I want at least 2 players on the same team as my QB, but I don't want more than 3, just uncheck the QB plus 3 or QB plus 4 or whatever. And yeah.
And I actually think this is for Average Tuesday. I think this is actually probably a little bit more where I'll be. I think you can use both of these things in conjunction. I think you can also use like one or the other where it makes a little bit more intuitive sense to you. I will probably do something like this and not even actually set like a stack rule like this, and instead just limit it from the exposures. But
the main reason you'd want to do the stack rules, if you have opinions about the positions, that if you want to make sure you have a wide receiver or tight end with your QB, that would be, I think, the main reason where you have a little bit more control over which positions are in your stack. And just one thing I want to point out, just make sure that if you do set those stack types, that you look at the secondary stacks as well, and you're not unchecking all of those. Usually I'll just include like secondary 1, 1, and maybe 2. I think it's debatable whether you should allow the 2 stack secondaries or not. But
I have a question for you, Matt, that I actually truthfully don't know the answer to. Do these stacks, does any stack ever include the defense? Like, can secondary 2 mean running back and defense?
Okay. No, we don't include the defense.
So this is always basically 2 on the same team, running back, wide receiver, tight end.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Cool. Okay, cool. That's good. That's good for me to know. Yeah. And then so while we're over here, Tavi had a question as well that I think is like the perfect example of this. and said, is there an easy way to create different stacking rules for different QBs? For example, if Mahomes, then 2 additional Kansas City pass catchers, no bring back required. If Hurts, then 1 to 2 additional Philly pass catchers with a 1 bring back required. And then said that running into issues when setting multiple stacking rules with different teams selected. Matt, I mean, I think I have an answer to this, but I imagine you've probably got a more direct route to getting to the right spot here. How would you handle this if somebody wanted to have different sized stacks for different teams?
So this is a great question because it really shows off why these rules are so cool. So I would add a rule. I would add a group rule, not a stack rule, and do automatic with the if. And you would say if, at least one QB is, or exactly either way, is used, then include, at least however many you want, at least 1 or 2 on the same team. And then you would save as manual. And so what this is going to do is create a different manual rule for every QB. And then you go into your Mahomes rule and you edit it. And you say, so for this, it would be, I guess for this one, it's saying we don't want, so maybe you change this to 2. You say, if Mahomes, then I actually want 2 secondary players.
Yep.
And with no bring back required. Yeah, so I guess if you want a bring back on everyone, let me think. You might have to set a separate group rule.
That's kind of what I was thinking.
One with
here.
bringbacks and
one
without bringbacks.
Exactly, yeah. So the first one was saying use at least 1 player on the same team. This one is saying use at least 1 player on the opposing team.
Right.
And then you just delete the Mahomes one. And whichever other QBs where you don't want to force the bring back. So now we have these 2 rules. So for the opposing one, we can delete Mahomes. And any other quarterback where you don't want to force the run back. So I think that is how I would do it.
Yeah.
I haven't tested this specific thing. So, if you're having trouble with that, just, let us know and support, and we'll, see if it's either something that you need to adjust in the rules or something that we need to fix in the builder. We've done a ton of testing, but like we said, there's so many ways to use this that, we're expecting that there's going to be ways probably to break it. We're not going to pretend like this is a completely 100% bug-free product, because that has probably never existed in the history of software. But that's how I would do it. And and I think that's just a really cool way of showing how powerful this way of doing rules is that you just create all these and you edit it. But if you don't want to have specific, exceptions, then you just save as an auto rule. You don't have to worry about creating the manual rules. You just save it as auto rule, and you just say, hey, every QB, I just want, 1 secondary or 1 same team, 1 opposing team. Obviously, you could do that with a stack as well, but the groups tend to give you more control because you add like the stat requirements. So you can say, I only want to do this with QBs with projection above X or something like that.
And that's what I was going to say. I think this gets a little bit into the strategic side of things, but like what I would do is try to see, what do the quarterbacks that you're comfortable playing +3 have in common with one another on a stat level? Because there should be something, right? Like they should either be projected higher than other quarterbacks, or maybe they have more attempts in their sims or more passing touchdowns. Like who knows exactly what it is. And if they don't, then maybe there's actually like a little bit, like it's interesting that if you can't create an automatic rule for what you're trying to do, that actually might be a little bit of a bias that you have, because the Sims are saying there's actually not a lot that these players have in common. Like there's not any reason why you would want to make the stack of Patrick Mahomes the exact same way you want to make one for Davis Mills. And because you kind of think that you do need to do that, that's actually a bit of a bias there. And I know that's an extreme example, but do you get what I'm saying there?
Oh yeah, totally. Yeah. I mean, I think, I could see one reason being like the spread of the game, which, there isn't a way to do that with the automatic. So that would be a decent reason. Like, okay, if it's a 15-point spread, then I don't need a run back. But if it's closer than I do, and that's something you could do kind of manually. I will say, I think we're probably planning on including more of like the Vegas and team total stuff in the stat requirements section. I think right now it's just like the player columns, but I can't remember if we actually have that logged, but it would be a good idea to include that as a, if the team total is above 25, then do this. That would be a cool feature addition. But
yeah,
I do agree with you, Jordan, in general that if you have to make those manual adjustments and you can't do it automatic, then make sure that there's some objective reason why you are doing that, and not just, hey, I know Mahomes is a good quarterback or whatever it is.
right, yeah. Real quickly, Tavi had followed up and said that came to the same conclusion and did a bit of testing, and that it works, but it does take the builder a lot longer to build lineups. We are working to make the builder quicker and more responsive with some of these new rules. I also think it's fair to say that as you put more restrictions on the builder, you should be prepared that it's going to take longer to build lineups. And for me, if I'm going to end up building in rules to my build, I might not look for as high of a pool as I've done before. Part of the reason I've kind of always pushed, hey, I'm always building 1,500 lineups all the time in all my builds, is because a lot of times I do a lot of quality control after the build to get my lineups where I want. With this ability to make those lineups start from a better starting point for me, I'll probably be a little bit more comfortable on the 500 lineup pool. But Matt, any thoughts about like just kind of the build speed in general here as we move forward?
Yeah. One thing is I literally, like right before we started this call, I pushed out a quick bug fix that was causing some speed issues with when you set like a ton of conditional manual rules. So that might help with this specific situation. In general. Do keep in mind if you set an auto rule that's like a group by, it's not really one rule. It's one rule for each player that applies in that group by. So if you're saying group by quarterback, then it's 26 different rules. If you're saying group by player and you're setting some stat requirement, it could be one rule for every single player in the pool or that fits it. So just keep in mind as you're thinking, oh, this isn't that complex, is that it actually can be more complex where it's actually doing a lot of rules. But again, yeah, we're definitely going to be looking at any build speed issues or errors like that as they come up, and make sure that the builder is kind of optimized to not slow down too much in those cases. So definitely don't be afraid to reach out to support if you're seeing builds that are slower than what you would expect.
Right.
But yeah, the other thing is, if it's something that's really uncommon that you might get like a few times in your 500, 1,500 pool, but it's slowing down the build a lot, there's also nothing wrong with just forget the rule, run your build, and just uncheck those lineups after the fact.
Yeah,
that can be faster.
And I think that's another good reason of why, running a build and seeing what you need is always going to be the best first option here, as opposed to trying to figure out everything that you might need ahead of time and making all the rules for it, even just from the standpoint of build speed.
Yeah.
Wanted to kind of jump over to YouTube chat here. We'll start with this one. Metal alloy here. Actually, first let me address this question. So Cameron had asked just kind of for general advice for today's baseball slate. Cameron, if we have time towards the end of the stream, happy to come back to this and maybe just kind of talk a little bit of general slate strategy. But for today, just since we just put out this big new this big new rules update, we want to focus on the questions there. So going to start there, and that maybe this next question will help you out with that anyway. Metal alloy said, other than the kind of restricting low power hitters to only in stacks, like I talked about in my video, any other recommended settings for MLB that you would consider? Curious, if you guys have any thoughts on some things that you might want to at least experiment with it with MLB with the new rules.
I honestly haven't thought too much about MLB. Stacking rules are kind of the main thing with MLB.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, the only in stacks is obviously, that's a big one. I'm trying to think if there's anything with pitchers that you might want to
I was trying to think of something, which I think if we can down the road add the team totals as like stat requirements, that would be so cool for stacking. Like if using two pitchers above 25% ownership only allow 3 or less players from teams with like a team total higher than 5 or something like that. Like that would
Yeah.
be really cool. I haven't thought of that many use cases for using it for baseball, but just off the top of my head, that's like something I could think of.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
think definitely the pitcher ownership could be an interesting one. If like don't play both chalky pitchers in the same lineup. I mean, I don't think that's like a great global rule, but that's the type of thing I could see being useful. Sorry, go ahead, Jordan.
no. I was like kind of going down that route as well. I think there's an interesting ownership rule there where you could say, like, for tonight, for example, if either Robbie Ray or Snell, then make sure that you're like, I don't know, 5 stacking a lower owned team. Again, I think in this case we're kind of looking for something for the question where I feel like the ownership fade slider just does a really good job of just dealing with that organically anyway. The video I put out earlier with my like kind of power rule is like honestly the rule that I'm most excited to use. And I think that's probably where I'm going to stay for most of my MLB stuff.
Yeah.
I can't think of something that I haven't been able to get the entire MLB season with what we already had.
Agreed. Yeah.
Yeah, I think probably sort of manual type rules. If there's just a specific situation where you want to say, if I have an Angel stack, then it has to include Trout. So it'd be sort of you just add, the non-Trout Angels hitters in the primary, and then add Trout in secondary. And it's like at least 3. That's the kind, that's one kind of thing that I could see maybe being useful.
Yeah. I like that.
But again, the builder is going to like generally do that for you, but maybe not 100% of the time, because there are sims where the Angels go off and Trout and Ohtani don't, but it's so uncommon that maybe it's not worth including those types of lineups.
Yeah, and selectively, if you ran your test build and you're like, wow, I am getting a lot of Angels today, and then you come to find that you're not getting a lot of Trout and Ohtani, maybe that is just kind of like a good, slate specific rule where you could say, hey, if we're already getting up to using like 3 or 4 of these guys, then Trout or Ohtani needs to be the last piece, right? I think that would be like one way where this would make sense. Like why 5 stack the Angels without either of them? And the builder will pick up on a lot of that, but in a case by case basis, I think it's a good approach. With that said, on the MLB point here, Aaron said, is there a way to set a specific MLB DK lineup construction with the new lineup rules? I would say, yeah, I mean, you have like virtually unlimited customization here of what you want that stack to look like, down to the exact positions that can and can't be used there, along with batting order. Again, for me, I'm probably not even going to be as selective as this, and instead probably do more of just kind of picking the stack constructions that I'm comfortable getting exposure to here for baseball, something like this. Again, just because in baseball in particular, I'm totally unopinionated about what positions show up in my stack.
Yeah, I do want to point out, just from a technical perspective, choosing what you were just showing there, Jordan, of like only 4-2 or above. For baseball, I believe that is in the background. We just force a 4 stack. Okay. In that case, so like if you added a 4 stack, it would be the exact same thing. So just like an FYI that you could kind of do it either like add a 4 stack and do that, but you don't need to. But that is one thing, you can kind of use the rules as like, this is the minimum I want, and then set the stack type exposures as this is like the maximum I want, or just these are the constructions. And yeah.
Right. Yeah. Okay, cool. That's good to know. Interesting one here. This should be a fun one. Spencer says, can you show how to force pair a quarterback plus a wide receiver in college football in the Superflex using the rules?
Oh, I've not looked at college football yet. This is, in theory, you should be able to, but I'm actually...
Maybe should we give it a try and see?
You can try it. So let's see, QB plus wide receiver in the Superflex. So one problem or thing that we haven't accounted for in these rules is like the positional, we don't. The rules, the positions are kind of based on like the eligible positions, not the specific position that the player goes in. Yeah, I'm not sure. You might be able to do it with
Yeah,
groups,
I think the challenge
but
here is because again, it's going to be hard to say. Well, I guess so. Where my head's at is potentially eliminate all super flexes except for quarterbacks. Would be probably where I would start there, and then you could say use if
yeah, it might not be possible. I was
yeah
Eric is our resident college football expert, and he was just DMing me that he doesn't think that you can do that right now. So that is something I know there's college football fanatics out there that really want some more advanced rule functionality here. So we'll definitely take a look. It doesn't seem like we're too far away from being able to do that,
yeah
but it might not be possible at this very moment. I think the key is going to be having that like positional rule, not just what they're eligible for. But yeah.
cool. It kind of an interesting theory question here. Interested to hear both your guys' takes on this one from Tamakas here. Can you talk a little bit more about overfitting? Like, how much are you willing to restrict with rules versus letting SaberSim do its thing?
Oh, that's the $1 million question, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's it's hard to answer. I think the process that we like to talk about with running your research build first that doesn't make any adjustments and then adjusting from there is that's a really good process that I think is a good place to start. And I think, yeah, one thing to keep in mind is, the builder is running based on our sims. We're running the sims of the games thousands of times, but there are outlier sims that some situation that might only happen a handful of times over the thousands of sims. And so that situation might kind of end up in a lineup. Obviously, it kind of depends on the sim precision setting, but you know, you might get lineups that are sort of low probability that aren't worth the risk. And so that's the kind of thing that I think the rules might be helpful at sort of trimming off like the lower probability outcomes, even if they are possible. And when they happen, can win you a bunch of money. You might be in a contest where you don't need to take those stands and play lineups that have those low probability outcomes because you can get enough leverage and bank equity with safer plays, if that makes sense. So
Yep.
something I know, like on the DFS Twitter verse, there's a lot of discussion about the Bengals ownership last week. This is getting a little bit off topic, but I think it's kind of similar to this overall question of like, there's stuff that you can do that might have edge, but like playing Bengals was like safe because it's just not something that's going to hurt you too much. And I think there's similar things with pitchers that are super high owned in MLB, and maybe they're not in the optimal as frequently as their ownership suggests, but like fading them, it's just not really worth the risk. And I think with rules, it's kind of, for me, the way I would use them is covering those outliers that I just don't really want these constructions in my lineup that are low probability to win, or maybe they have like really low floors even if their absolute ceiling is high. I know that's kind of theoretical, but does that make sense how I'm explaining it?
It makes a ton of
think it
sense to
makes
me.
sense. Yeah. And this is just a sidebar, but Matt, remember last year when Jamar Chase had like 270 yards and 3 touchdowns, and you went in the Sims and you're like, there was one Sim, like Sim
Yeah, I
730,
do remember that. Yeah.
where he did that. And because everyone was like, oh my gosh, this is higher than his 99th percentile. And you're like, nope, we had one Sim where he
It
did
was in The
that.
Sims.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the
Yeah.
way I plan on using it is like going back to the build review adjust, is that something that like just sticks with me every day is like I never want to enter a lineup set that I'm not comfortable with. If I'm not comfortable with it, then I should go back and adjust and then rebuild. And so I'm really planning on using the rules like in that adjust phase. Like if there's something I can't get through adjusting exposures or just something very specific that I want to use, when I send exposures back to projection screen, I'm going to be inclined to add a rule to get whatever that last piece is I'm missing that will make me feel comfortable going into a slate with my lineups.
Yeah, well said. I think my 2 cents on this is, I'll go back to kind of that objectivity angle. Any group that I'm going to add in my particular process, I want to be just very explicitly clear. Like I could very clearly explain why I'm trying to do that, what the reason is, what do I gain out of that, and why is the rule itself kind of more objective. And it's easy to fall in the trap, but if I find myself adding rules in that I can't, when looking back at them, kind of think I did this to get a little bit more correlation or to avoid duplication a little bit more. If I can't, kind of go through my list of rules and explain that, then it's probably something that I'm either just kind of leaking bias in, or just is like neutral EV and is just making my build take longer. So, but I think it's a really good question. And I think, honestly, even just having this question in the back of your mind probably is going to lead you to a better result, because you're thinking about like the important kind of, I don't know, basis of the like overfitting discussion. So, School said, can you explain selection methods versus manual versus automatic? And can Matt explain it? Because I watched Jordan's video on it and still confused. Matt, you want to give a shot at it?
Yeah. So this is honestly, it took me a little bit of time to wrap my mind around how this works, because it definitely is very, it's not super straightforward. I think we've designed this in a way that makes it as straightforward as we could, but it's still not a straightforward concept. So basically, automatic is just choosing the players that are in the groups based on criteria. So the criteria are positions and stat requirements, at least for like the primary group. The secondary is a little bit different, because the secondary is sort of depends on the primary. So if you, well, in some cases, this is why it gets complicated, but if you use group by, then you're creating a different group for every either player, team, or game that satisfies that first set of requirements. So in this case, but based on what you're showing right now, it's going to be a different rule for every single player in your pool. But if you uncheck flex, then it would be a different rule for every single captain in your pool. If you added a stat requirement that said projection greater than 20, it would only be what Stravinsky, Harris, and Chubb captain.
I have a
go ahead, Andrew.
Which I think might, just rereading this question, maybe this will make a little sense. So say if I put a rule where I always want a QB with at least one receiver over 10 points as a stat requirement. So it's like I want to filter for QBs and then a receiver on the team as a stack that is greater than 10 points. So if I did it manually, it'll calculate right now the receivers that are above 10.
Yeah, sorry, real quick, Andrew, because I think what you're explaining is like the difference between saving as an auto rule and saving as manual rules. And I'm not actually sure if he's asking, which is something. Well, why don't you continue? But just to clarify, what was that, Jordan?
I was going to say let's start, because I think since Matt got us started off here, let's start by talking about selection method, manual versus automatic, and then I think what Andrew's talking about here with the difference of saving as auto versus manual is also a very important distinction.
Yeah, so I didn't mean to cut you off. I just want to make sure that we're explaining the same things. So yeah, the automatic is just choosing who is in the primary and secondary groups automatically. Based on the requirements, the positions, and the stat requirements that you choose. Manual is you're choosing them manually from the player list. And I think a really good way to help understand it is make an automatic rule and then choose the save as manual option that Andrew was starting to explain. And that'll show you, it's because any automatic rule, when you actually click run build is converted into one or more manual rules in the background, and that's what the builder uses. So like the builder isn't using the automatic rules. The builder is only listening for manual rules, and so automatic is just a way so that you don't have to create each one individually. And so yeah, what Andrew was saying is, yeah, if you make this rule, you could do this manually by going through every single quarterback and saying, if quarterback is in lineup, then include one player from the same team, or then include, and you add all of the players on the quarterback's team,
Right. I would
and you
click
go through
every
every
guy
single
above
team.
10 points.
Yeah, exactly. And this is just a way of doing that automatically, so you don't have to. Right. And then you can see when you save as manual rules, you can see all of the different players that it found that fit this criteria.
Yeah, Andrew, did you have anything that you kind of wanted to add on, especially like regarding the way that they save? I know we kind of cut you off.
Yes. So when you're doing a manual rule, let's say that projections update and we have like a fringe case where a guy's like 9.87 and then he gets bumped to 10.2. In manual, is he not going to be added to that group? But if he was an automatic, he would be?
Correct. So when you save as manual, it saves them at the current state of the projections. So someone that's right on the edge there will, if they're at 9 points, they won't be in this rule initially. If the sim updates and they go to 10 points, if you had saved as manual, they won't show up unless you click the little refresh, which I don't know if you hit that. I don't remember if you hit that on the video, Jordan, but if you hit cancel here and you go scroll up and you hit that refresh icon, that will like recreate all of the groups based on the current state. And so basically when you save as automatic, it's essentially when you hit build lineups, it's making all of those groups.
Yeah.
But that would be the same as hitting refresh and then building lineups. Pretty much exactly the same thing. So yeah, basically it's saving as manual. You only really want to do if you want to make changes to the individual groups. There's not, or you just want to look at what they look like, make sure that you're kind of getting what you meant to get with the rule. But you generally don't, if you're not planning on editing individual teams or rules, you don't need to save as manual.
Yeah. And I think that's a good way of looking at it. I mean, the one thing that I kind of just want to like stress here, and then we'll move on, is that this is basically just the method by which the rule that gets the method by which the rule gets made. But it is not, there is not like a different core logic to what's going on here. It's basically, do you want to pick the players that are going into the rule, or do you want us to pick the players based on the criteria you set? But it is not as if you had the exact same players with the exact same logic that they would do different things if one was manual versus one was automatic. It's just kind of the process by which you get them. While we were on, there was a question here from someone here, but I think it's a good opportunity to just touch on it. What does the star icon do here? Since you mentioned the refresh icon, another thing I didn't talk about in my video, what do these stars do?
So the star means it will be enabled by default on a different slate. So that is a good point. So one of the big changes here is that lineup rules are saved to your account, like for the sport and site that you created them on. So if you go to a different slate, then we'll show those rules. If it's not starred, then they'll be unchecked by default. Maybe there's a bug there. What should happen is that if it's starred, then it's enabled by default when you go to. Maybe it's because
I think it's because I have all these other rules.
Yeah, if you had already loaded the slate, then it probably won't be. But if you go to like a brand new slate, then the starred rule should be enabled by default. So if there's like a rule that you just know you want on every single slate, regardless, then star it and it'll just be enabled by default. If it's not starred, it'll just be unchecked, but you can still check it if you want to use it.
Yeah, I was going to test real quickly. I have a feeling
I think this isn't going to work just because you've already. It's really just like brand new slates. So I think with this one, because you would already like, we don't want to check it for you if you've already like loaded the slate and changed your setting. It's just like when you load the slate for the first time, we determine based on the star, which rules are going to be enabled by default that first load.
So, at least we don't have to rebuild it, and it's either check and include or leave unchecked. So
right,
I do like that a lot.
There's the question. It's from Rob G. So cool. Real quick. So Samuel had said, are the lineup rules versus group rules, are we going to be able to combine both, or is that not possible?
Yep.
Yeah, they should be totally. You should be able to combine anything that you're seeing here. Even the exposures and stuff like that, they should be compatible together. So
yeah. So for NFL previously, we had like basic stacking and advanced stacking. Those weren't compatible, but we've just combined all the stacking into just one stack type. So a lineup rule is either a stack rule or a group rule, and you can add both.
Perfect. Francis says, not sure if this is possible, but I want to avoid playing running back and wide receiver from the same team unless part of a stack. Any way to do this with the new rules?
Yeah, so that will be coming. We were planning on adding that, and we just didn't have time and felt like we wanted to get this out there before. So what we'll be doing when we do implement this is basically like an unless rule, which is sort of like if then, except it'll basically just be, you could say, don't include or no more than 2 players from the same team, and then you added unless, and it would be unless there's 4 players, or
unless there's a quarterback.
Stack. Yeah, unless there's a quarterback from the same team. So we will add that, but for now it's pretty easy to do with the secondary. Just uncheck the secondary stack types that basically uncheck everything except secondary 1-1, and that'll do the same thing.
Gotcha. Yeah.
So that's easier anyway. I guess the only situation is if you want to like allow certain positions from the same team together, but not others. But
yeah,
anyway.
And just to be clear, that would be done over here in your stack type. So not necessarily like setting a firm rule there, but just like eliminating that, setting that to 0 max exposure for the secondary 2. And I suppose all of the secondaries up to like whatever, if you were being very thorough about it. A couple interesting. So when we were talking about the baseball rules, there are some takes from people in the chat. I got this said, I always group out high owned pitchers to 1 per lineup on DK. Again, I think that's, especially slate specific, a good idea. There are those slates out there where it's like, I don't know, maybe it's like DeGrom and just some ridiculously underpriced value guy that maybe you do want to group them out and make sure you're not playing them both together. Max has a really creative idea here, I think, for baseball. I've talked about this before in past streams, but we didn't have a way to do this very cleanly. But setting a rule that says if you use any player from a game where there's weather concerns, you have to be using them as a full stack. Avoids a situation where you're just getting like unnecessary one-offs from games that have a ton of weather risk, and basically saying, if I'm going to play the game that has a chance to postpone, I'm playing the event where that game goes off. You have to have that stack to win, and only 5 stacking those players together. I think that's a really good idea. And I actually hadn't thought about that, Max, until you mentioned it.
Yeah. I think with that, you would do the if manual and then delete the teams that you would say, like, if at least 1 player is used from,
it would be game in this case, right?
Yeah, it would be by game, and you would uncheck pitcher, I guess. Well, I guess you would uncheck pitcher, and you'd say use at least however big you want your stack to be, and on the same game. Yep.
Yeah,
and I guess you would save as manual, and then you just delete.
Couldn't you get like a 2-2 out of that though?
Yeah, I think you'd probably do this. Actually, I think makes more sense for that one, and say like that, and then you would go in here, save the manual rules, and basically like if let's just say hypothetically that like only Coors had the weather concern, you could go in.
You could also just
you just uncheck, on the box. Uncheck like the whole rule
Yeah, I actually
And
think
then
that there is a bug around. Yeah, it should uncheck all of them. It doesn't. So I think that's actually a bug.
Gotcha.
But yeah, that's easier than deleting. The other thing you could do is just create it manually and just say
Yeah.
for this
Right.
specific game, just
Right,
put in
right.
the players. That's probably a faster way. If there's only one, if there's like half the games are weather games, but if there's only one, it's probably easier to do manual. But you
There's
just can't do
nothing
it previously because we have the if now. So
for sure. Yeah. There's nothing that better like is an analogy to the my DFS process than trying to make an automatic rule out of literally everything when a manual rule would like work perfectly fine. I'm like, what is the
yeah.
exact logic we can do so I can save 2 clicks from just doing it myself in the manual rule? But anyway, let's see. Let me go ahead and keep going here. And feel free, guys, if you see a question that I missed as well in chat or Discord, just like let me know. See, there's just a lot of chat in chat, which is awesome here. So I'm trying to see if we see some questions. This is an interesting one from Ultra Light being here. Said, would it be possible to analyze all milli makers in a model to define the like optimal rules to create, or you should be using? We've talked about this quite a bit in office hours before. I have some concerns with like thinking about it this way, but I mean, Matt, interested to hear your take on like looking at past winning lineups and trying to kind of back out lineup constructions from there.
I'm against that idea. I really I hate basically any of that analysis that I've seen. I know that it comes out every single year before week 1. There's all these people being, with these viral threads or viral articles being like, this is what all the milli makers looked like in the past 10 years. And I think it's mostly like pretty garbage analysis. I think the idea makes sense of like, okay, yeah, you want to look at previous contests, but there's a lot of just flaws in the way that analysis works. One is obviously just the variance, and there's just a ton of randomness in which lineups show up at the top. The other thing is you definitely have to make sure you're comparing like the constructions of those top lineups to the fields. You're saying if there's 50% of lineups have a QB stack in the field, and and 40% of the top 10 in the milli maker have a QB stack, that makes the QB stack worse. Anyway, you just have to compare to the field. And then I think one of the biggest things that gets overlooked in that kind of analysis is that there's correlation between how good of a player you are and the type of stack that you're using. So like a lot of people that have really good projections, they're just, the top DFS pros, I think will often like set pretty specific stack types. And while obviously that means that they're smart people and you should learn from that, that also means that if you're seeing a bunch of a specific stack type at the top of contests, that it might be more correlated with like the people that are winning those contests are good at selecting players, and not that the stacking type itself is what led to the winning lineup, if that makes sense. So that's getting into it a little bit. I think we will probably do some back testing on like slider settings with NFL and see what that looks like. And we'd like to do more analysis on just stack types in general, which types of stacks tend to do better in the Sims. But I think looking at like actual contest results, there's a lot of ways to go astray there and kind of come to conclusions that that aren't really valid.
Thanks for the insight. Great to hear from one of our data scientists.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I'm a little bit like too anti like analyzing milli makers. I just think it's like such a clickbaity thing every year, and generally you're just not really getting anything useful from that analysis. But not to say you can't do it well.
And if you want to, and if you disagree, I agree with you there quite a bit, Matt. But if you do disagree with us, you should have the ability to make those exact milli maker winning constructions like down to the very position, at least more than you did before this update now. Combined with another thing I know very popular is like the min and max exposure thresholds for lineups ownership. I'm sorry. Yeah. Another thing that you can use there now to get those in. A couple quick questions here that came in Discord here. One, Fisty said, can we make a rule based off of percentiles? I know I had asked for this like exact same thing earlier today. Matt, that one is like on the list coming in a future update.
Yep, that's on our list for V2 updates. Hopefully not too long there. I don't think it should be too difficult. We just didn't include it in this initial release.
And Andrew and I are both 95th percentile truthers. I know we both like do a lot with that. So be interested to mess around with some stat requirements with the 95th percentile. One other thing I wanted to mention here, Eagles had mentioned, can we get a demo for stacking in hockey? I know just based on what I was messing around with here earlier today, that there are a couple things as we get closer to hockey season to clean up here as well. But I mean, I would say at a baseline, you should be able to, let me pull this up, like do kind of the basic, hockey stack type rules, like three guys. Do we have line information here in the stacking rules? Do you know on the Matt? If we have,
honestly, we have not looked much at hockey, so I think that there's some updates that we need to make here.
Okay.
We don't have that now, so obviously that's a pretty important thing for hockey, and I know it's coming up fast, so we'll definitely get that in there. And before the season starts to be able to stack based on line.
Yeah, and Eagles, I would say, what we'll probably do is we'll have at least one video coming out before hockey season, and I will in that video kind of walk through, what I would recommend is some baseline good stacks that you might want to consider for your builds there as we get a little bit closer. So, cool. Let's see, wrapping up. I know we're getting close to the end of time here, so we'll go ahead and hit a couple of these last final questions real quick. Ramsey said, did we lose the checkbox on the entries section? Are we talking about the entry editor here? I'll do a quick check. I don't think so. But, oh, we did. We actually, yes, we did. So
does it look like that, like from a build? If I were to hit like fill entries, you might have to run them real quick.
Yeah. Andy says to make sure to log the NHL thing on the card. We'll make sure it ends up there. And we'll take a look at this checkbox thing for the entry editor as well. While I'm looking here for any kind of final questions, Matt, Andrew, I'll give you guys both kind of a moment here. Any final thoughts on the rules overall that you want to leave people with? Like one thing to kind of think about as people are maybe using this new feature to build their lineups for baseball, football, whatever.
Go ahead, Matt. I'll let you take
it. I mean, I think we went over it, I think, especially at the beginning, but I would, the build, review, adjust process, I think, make sure that you're doing kind of the rules, I would say like one at a time and making sure that you have good reason for them. Run your build and see how you want to adjust and then go and add your rule. And you don't have to do that every time, but as you're getting used to how to use these rules, I wouldn't just like add a ton of them right off the bat and then run your build, because again, the more rules you're adding, the more you're kind of moving away from like what the Sims are saying to do. And that's not necessarily bad on its own, but you just want to be mindful about what you're adjusting and make sure that it's something you actually want or need to do. So I would, go like one at a time with the rules. But like, I guess the other thing is just, I definitely recommend with like the automatic rules is to like save as you're playing around with it, do the save as manual so you can really see what the groups that you're creating. Cause I think that was the most helpful thing for me as I was, playing around with it and testing it, was I could kind of double check that I'm actually getting the group rules that I want by saving as manual and being like, all right, this is like the correct players in primary and secondary, and this makes sense to me. And then you can kind of tinker from there if you want. But
Agreed. Andrew, your thoughts?
No, I think well said from Matt. It's really just a fine-tuned method, not something that needs to be heavily implemented up front. I think it's more of an adjust type of tool is how we're approaching it.
Yeah. Perfect. I agree. Last thoughts from me, I would say is there's a lot of power here, a lot of new control. It's going to feel pretty new. Don't feel the need, again, I know I mentioned this before, but to completely integrate this into your process all on day one here. Even for me heading into football this Sunday and the baseball slate tonight, I'll probably dabble a little bit, but I'm not going to go in here, try to set every rule I can think of and go crazy in that department. And I think, start incorporating this into your process slowly based on what you see ways you can improve your lineups. Real quick before we go, just a reminder for those that are maybe stumbled into our office hours here for the first time. You picked a great day. These new lineup rules are up in the app right now, and we have a totally free 7-day trial at our site, SaberSim.com. If you've checked us out before in the past, we reset everybody's trial at the start of football season. So even if you were here last year for NBA, people have been asking for these kinds of rules and ways to get more specific about their lineup constructions forever. And honestly, I can't remember a release that we've done that the team was more excited about than this one. So come check us out. Come check out some of these new rules. And in the meantime, enjoy the baseball slate here tonight if you're playing baseball. And we'll be right back again for another office hours tomorrow at 5 o'clock Eastern. But thanks, Matt, for coming on. And Andrew, we'll be back on tomorrow.
Yep. Sounds great. One quick thing, Jordan, you have a great how to use the rules video in app that anybody can see if they got onto the stream a little late or just need a review.
Yep, it'll pop up at the bottom of your app when you first sign in. If you accidentally X out of it and can't get it back, it is up on the YouTube channel as well, right here. So go give that a watch. But cool. Cheers, everyone. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.